Louise Mixer, a 23-year-old law student at the University of Michigan, mysteriously disappeared after seeking a ride through a college bulletin board. Her intention was to return to her hometown in Muskegon and share the exciting news of her engagement and plans to relocate to New York City with her loved ones. Tragically, the following day, her lifeless body, dressed in her raincoat and accompanied by a copy of the novel Catch-22, was discovered on a grave in Denton Cemetery, located in Van Buren Township. She had suffered 2 fatal gunshot wounds to the head. The authorities promptly initiated an investigation, yet it would take several decades to unravel the truth behind Jane's harrowing fate. The township of Van Buren, situated in Wayne County, Michigan, is a charter township strategically positioned between the Detroit Metropolitan and Willow Run airports. This advantageous location renders it an appealing destination for both business enterprises and residential living. Noteworthy establishments such as USA Jet Airlines, headquartered at Willow Run Airport, contribute to the township's economic prosperity. Furthermore, Van Buren Township serves as the home base for Visteon, an automotive parts manufacturer. As per the 2020 census, the township's population amounted to 30,375 residents. However, it is imperative to acknowledge the crime statistics within the city. The likelihood of falling victim to any form of crime in Van Buren Township is 1 in 23. It was within this community that the tragic tale of Jane Louise Mixer unfolded. Born on February 23, 1946, in Muskegon, Michigan, Jane grew up alongside her older sister, Barbara, under the care of their parents, Dan and Marion Mixer. Jane was remembered by those who knew her as a thoughtful and serious individual who never hesitated to voice her opinions. She was known for her intelligence and independence, always forging her own path. Maggie Nelson, Jane's niece, expressed her admiration for her aunt, describing her as someone she aspired to be: ambitious, rebellious, brilliant, and self-reliant. Driven by her desire to make a difference, Jane enrolled at the University of Michigan in the 1960s after completing high school. Her college education was just one step in her journey to impact the world. In 1969, Jane, at the age of 23, was filled with hope and determination. She was among the few women at law school, standing out among 420 students, and was deeply involved in political activism and civil rights advocacy. She was carving her own way forward. Additionally, she had recently become engaged to Phil Weitzman, an economics professor who shared her passion for social change. Despite dating for over a year, Jane faced opposition from her parents regarding her relationship with Phil. Her father's disapproval stemmed from Phil's Jewish faith and liberal beliefs, which he believed influenced Jane's participation in campus protests. To complicate matters further, Phil had secured a job at New York University, necessitating a move from Michigan to New York. Jane intended to break the news gently to her parents before Phil joined her for a spring break visit to their hometown of Muskegon. However, what was meant to be a joyous occasion marking Jane's engagement turned tragic. During that time, hitchhiking was a common practice driven by trust and a desire for freedom. While Jane exercised caution and did not accept rides from strangers, she utilized a popular ride board system at the university. This system consisted of a large map covered in plastic located in the student union basement, with wooden boxes categorized by destinations resembling a library card catalog. Jane wrote her contact information on a slip of paper and placed it in the Muskegon box. If another student had plans to go to the same place, they would contact each other and arrange to share a ride. In this case, a student named David Johnson called Jane to confirm their ride-sharing arrangement. On the evening of March 20th, 1969, Jane was in her dorm room at the Law Quadrangle with her fiancé, Phil. It was a cool spring evening, and spring had just officially begun the day before. After spending some time together, Phil left for a tutoring session, and Jane decided to call David Johnson at 6:30 p.m. to coordinate their ride. Jane had already packed her suitcase and had a gift for her mother. She left her dorm, not knowing that it would be the last time she would be seen alive. As the clock passed 10 p.m., Jane's father in Muskegon started to worry. She had promised to be home by 9:30 p.m. after finding a ride back. By 11 p.m., her father's worry turned into panic. He got in his car and searched the highway in Ann Arbor throughout the night, but he couldn't find any trace of Jane. At midnight, he called Phil, Jane's fiancé, who hadn't seen the driver but assumed everything was fine since Jane hadn't answered his call at 7 p.m. Dan's hope began to fade. By 4 a.m., Jane was still missing. Phil, now deeply concerned, went to her dorm room. It was still dark as he drove by. At 8 a.m., Dan informed Phil that he had reported Jane missing to the police. Phil managed to get a key to Jane's room and searched it, but he didn't find anything unusual. Little did they know at that time, Jane's journey had come to a chilling end much earlier than anyone could have imagined. Instead of heading west towards Muskegon, her intended destination 172 miles away, she had somehow ended up traveling just 14 miles east in the opposite direction. On the morning of Friday, March 21st, 1969, in Van Buren Township, about 14 miles from the University of Michigan, Nancy Groh, a housewife, was awakened by her 13-year-old son, who was running late for the school bus. While rushing to prepare her son, Nancy's attention was diverted when he pointed out a department store bag he had discovered outside. Intrigued, Nancy opened the bag to find a peculiar assortment of items, a gift-wrapped package with a card, law school papers and folders, and fuzzy purple slippers. The contents left Nancy puzzled. Whose belongings were these? She had no clue. Unbeknownst to Nancy, she was about to uncover a tragic truth. The abandoned bag and its mysterious contents filled her with an unsettling feeling, causing her to worry about her son walking to the bus alone. Consequently, she made the decision to personally drive him to school. As they passed Denton Cemetery, something caught Nancy's eye near the entrance, a flash of yellow. As she approached, her blood ran cold. A lifeless body lay sprawled near a headstone, partially concealed. Panic surged through her, and she steered the car towards her sister's house, trembling. Upon arrival, she immediately contacted the police to report her shocking discovery. At approximately 10:30 a.m., the Ypsilanti police, led by retired Detective Donald Bennett, arrived at Denton Cemetery, located at the end of a gravel road. There, they uncovered the lifeless body of Jane Mixer just inside the chain-link fence surrounding the cemetery. Her remains were covered with a raincoat and her personal belongings, including a suitcase, a paperback copy of Catch-22, and various clothing items on hangers were scattered around her body. Jane's posture was striking, with one arm resting above her head and the other shielding her eyes. The evident gunshot wounds on her head revealed the cause of her demise. However, the absence of blood and any signs of dragging indicated that the murder did not take place at the cemetery. Furthermore, a stocking had been tightly wrapped around her throat. Clad in a blue-gray jumper, her undergarments were partially pulled down. The only evidence left behind by the perpetrator were fresh tire tracks and the imprint of a man's shoe heel. These provided limited leads for the investigators at the crime scene. According to the findings of the Washtenaw County Medical Examiner, Robert Hendricks, Jane's cause of death was determined to be 2 gunshot wounds to her head. The initial shot struck her left temple, followed by another to the lower left part of her skull. Additionally, she had been strangled with a stocking of cinnamon color. Although the evidence suggested that the strangulation occurred after her death, the fact that Jane was partially undressed raised suspicions of potential sexual assault. Based on the medical examination, it was estimated that she was shot with a .22 caliber firearm sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. This time frame indicated that she had been held captive elsewhere for over 4 hours, assuming she was likely abducted around 6:30 p.m. The presence of soap granules on her coat led investigators to speculate whether she had been confined in a laundry area during her captivity. The news of Jane's death reached her parents swiftly, and they were faced with the heartbreaking task of identifying her body at the morgue in Ann Arbor. Unfortunately, word of the tragedy had also spread to the media, resulting in a swarm of reporters at the morgue entrance. As the police escorted Jane's parents away, they were bombarded with questions from the reporters. Following an officer's advice, they refrained from answering. "They promised to keep the reporters away from us," Dan Mixer said. "It was such a tragic situation. It felt like a deeply personal invasion of our privacy." Upon the discovery of Jane's body, the police initiated an immediate investigation into her murder. They quickly became aware of her planned rideshare with David Johnson. While conducting a search of Jane's room and the campus for clues, they stumbled upon two significant leads regarding the identity of the mystery driver. A check mark next to the name David Johnson in a phone book on Jane's dorm room desk suggested a potential connection. Additionally, in the basement of the law school library, they found another phone book with the words Mixer and Muskegon written in the margins. Acting on this information, the police paid a visit to the fraternity where University of Michigan student David Johnson resided. Despite David not being home, they questioned other residents and discovered that he was involved in a play on the night of Jane's disappearance. When they eventually spoke with David, he vehemently denied offering Jane a ride. After confirming David Johnson's alibi, the police ruled him out as a suspect in Jane's murder. Subsequently, investigators conducted a thorough search for every individual named David Johnson in Ann Arbor and its vicinity, particularly focusing on those who owned .22 caliber firearms. However, after an extensive investigation, all of these individuals were cleared of any involvement. Due to negative comments about Phil from Jane's father, the police turned their attention to Jane's fiancé. Despite facing intense questioning, Phil provided a solid alibi that led to his exoneration from suspicion in Jane's murder case. As the police delved deeper into Jane Mixer's murder, more killings occurred in the area, leaving them puzzled and alarmed as the case seemed to follow a troubling trend. Jane Mixer became the third young woman to be found dead in the area within the last 2 years. By the end of July, the number of victims had risen to 7, most of whom had suffered violent treatment before their deaths. As the bodies continued to accumulate, the Mixer family retreated from the public eye, but the community demanded action as the killer appeared to be unstoppable in 1969. The breakthrough in the case didn't occur until the 7th victim was discovered, leading to a surprising arrest. On July 31st, 1969, 30-year-old John Norman Collins, an education major at Eastern Michigan University with no prior criminal record, was taken into custody for the murder of Karen Sue Baineman. A witness came forward, stating that they had seen Collins with Karen shortly before her death. While many believed Collins to be responsible for all 7 murders, he was only tried and convicted for Baineman's murder. Despite maintaining his innocence, Collins received a life sentence on August 19, 1970. He was never formally accused of the other 6 killings. Nonetheless, the people of Michigan felt a sense of relief, knowing that the perpetrator had been apprehended and the string of murders had come to an end. However, doubts lingered among investigators regarding Collins's involvement in Jane Mixer's case, as it didn't fit the established patterns of the other killings. The case remained unsolved for over 30 years until cold case detective Eric Schroeder decided to re-examine the evidence in 2001. Among the items found in the evidence box were a blood-stained yellow and white striped towel used to wrap around Jane's head after she was shot, as well as pantyhose and other potential sources of DNA evidence. Although DNA analysis wasn't utilized in criminal convictions until 1986, it had become a crucial tool in trials by the time Schroeder reopened the cold case. The evidence was sent to the State Crime Lab in Lansing, Michigan, where DNA analyst Steve Milligan began his examination. Milligan initiated his investigation by examining the items under a black light. He observed 4 visible spots on Jane's pantyhose that had the potential to contain DNA. Although these spots were not blood or semen stains, they could have been sweat left by the killer when he moved Jane's body to the light source in the graveyard. After isolating the stains, Milligan determined that 3 of them originated from the same male donor. Furthermore, he analyzed a single blood spot discovered on Jane's hand at the crime scene and identified a second male donor. However, when Milligan compared these DNA samples to John Norman Collins, the suspected killer, they did not match. Consequently, the analyst entered the DNA into CODIS, the combined DNA index system. Surprisingly, the blood spot produced a match, leading to the identification of a new suspect, John Rules, a convicted murderer serving time for killing his mother. Although this discovery would typically be a cause for celebration among cold case detectives, a major obstacle emerged. John Rules was only 4 years old in 1969 when Jane was killed, and he resided in Detroit, approximately 40 miles away from the crime scene. Despite these glaring inconsistencies, Schroeder proceeded to Bellamy Creek Prison in Michigan to speak with Rules. During their conversation, Schroeder learned that Rules had a troubled upbringing. His transient mother often left him alone and occasionally resorted to sedating him with cough syrup. Rules recounted a childhood memory where he claimed to have stumbled upon a gruesome scene involving 2 of his uncles in the garage. He vividly remembered seeing a blood-covered body in the back seat of a running car. Efforts were made to locate one of these uncles, who was alive, but his DNA did not match any of the DNA found at Jane's crime scene. In the early 2000s, not only the police but also Maggie Nelson, the daughter of Barbara Nelson, Jane's sister, was focused on the murder of Jane Mixer as she was in the process of writing a book. The book presented a unique combination of poetry, memoir, and true crime, all revolving around the aunt she had never met. Although Jane had passed away before Maggie's birth, her tragic death had a profound impact on Maggie, shaping her life in various ways. In 2004, just as Maggie was preparing to release her memoir, Jane, a Murder, she received an unexpected call from Detective Schroeder, who informed her that progress was being made in the case. Maggie and her family were taken aback by this news. Despite knowing that the case had never been officially closed, they had resigned themselves to the belief that it would remain unsolved. A year after Detective Schroeder's interview with John Rules, he received another call from the state crime lab. The DNA found on Jane's pantyhose had yielded a match. It belonged to a 62-year-old man named Gary Leiterman from Gobles, Michigan. Leiterman, a retired nurse who was married with 2 children, seemed like an unlikely suspect. Schroeder spent over 2 months investigating Leiterman's background. He discovered that at the time of Jane's death, Leiterman was a 26-year-old man living approximately 20 miles from Arbor. He was unmarried and had served 4 years in the Navy. Although Leiterman did not have a criminal record for violent offenses, he had been arrested in 2001 for forging fake prescriptions. This incident stemmed from his struggle with addiction to painkillers after experiencing kidney stones. As part of his legal proceedings, he was required to undergo a treatment program, during which his DNA was entered into the combined DNA index system. In 2004, Schroeder brought Gary Leiterman in for questioning. 3 hours into the interrogation, Schroeder revealed the bombshell. He informed Leiterman that his DNA had been found on the body of murder victim Jane Mixer. Despite the incriminating evidence, Leiterman maintained his innocence, stating that he had not only not murdered Jane Mixer, but had never even met her. Schroeder observed undeniable evidence of Leiterman's involvement when he discovered Leiterman's DNA on Jane's pantyhose. Just before Thanksgiving in 2004, Leiterman was apprehended and held in custody without the possibility of bail. During the search of Leiterman's residence, detectives made a troubling discovery. They stumbled upon a hidden Polaroid photo in a bedside cabinet depicting an unconscious teenage girl partially undressed and lying on Leiterman's bed. Further investigation revealed that the girl was a 16-year-old South Korean exchange student who had been residing with the Leitermans. In a tearful testimony later on, the girl admitted to having no recollection of the photo being taken. Leiderman claimed that he had merely come across the photo and placed it in the cabinet to discuss with his wife upon her return from a trip. He described the exchange student as unruly and believed that he and his wife needed to address the situation regarding the photograph. Additionally, detectives uncovered an unmarked vial containing a powdered mixture of diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, and diazepam, the active ingredient in Valium, inside Leiderman's shaving kit. A toxicologist referred to this combination as a knockout potion. In January 2005, a hearing was conducted to present the state's case against Gary Leiderman. Maggie Nelson, accompanied by her mother Barbara and her grandfather Dan Mixer, attended the proceedings. Maggie recalled her grandfather being the first witness to testify. Throughout the hearing, other evidence was introduced, including testimony from a female co-worker of Leiderman's, who had accused him of inappropriate behavior on a bus during a work trip. Additionally, a man who had lived with Leiderman in the late 60s provided testimony. He recounted how Leiderman had once shown him a vial of liquid and boasted that it could render a woman unconscious, and an excessive amount could even be fatal. However, much of his testimony was later deemed inadmissible during the trial. In July of 2005, Gary Leiderman faced trial for the murder of Jane Mixer in 1969. The prosecution, led by Steve Hiller, presented a case that outlined Leiderman's actions. Leiderman, using the alias David Johnson, responded to Jane's ride request at the University of Michigan. He picked her up in front of her dorm around 6:30 p.m. on March 20th, 1969, drove her to an unknown location, and held her there, potentially at gunpoint. It is suspected that he tried to assault Jane, leading to her resistance. In response, he shot her twice in the head, strangled her, and then disposed of her body in Denton Cemetery after midnight on March 21st, 1969. The primary evidence linking Leiderman to Jane was DNA found on the pantyhose. Additional evidence included a phone book discovered at the University of Michigan building during Jane's murder, containing the handwritten words Mixer and Muskegon. Handwriting expert Thomas Riley compared these words to samples from Leiderman and concluded that he likely wrote them. During the trial, a former roommate testified that Leiderman had a newspaper covering the story of John Norman Collins, suspected of murdering women in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. The roommate also mentioned Leiderman's ownership of a .22 revolver and a basement firing range. State records confirmed Leiderman's purchase of a .22 caliber Ruger revolver in 1967, which he reported stolen in 1987. Despite the reported theft, police found a revolver cylinder consistent with a Ruger Single 6.22 revolver cylinder. In the courtroom, an expert in ballistics from the state police testified that the bullet fragments found in Jane's body during her autopsy were similar to those discovered in Leiderman's residence in Van Buren County back in 2004. The expert further stated that there were more than 30 different types of firearms that could have potentially fired such bullets. The DNA analysis conducted on Jane's pantyhose strongly indicated that Gary Leiderman was the perpetrator. According to a DNA expert, the likelihood of anyone else leaving that specific trace was astonishingly low, with odds of 171.5 trillion to 1. However, Leiderman's defense team had a different strategy in mind. They aimed to discredit the most significant piece of evidence against him, the DNA found on the pantyhose. Their argument revolved around the lack of trustworthiness of the pantyhose as evidence, especially considering that the blood found on Jane's hand belonged to an entirely different individual, a 4-year-old who should not have been present at the crime scene. This raised serious concerns about the accuracy of the laboratory's work and the possibility of errors. During the court proceedings, it was revealed that in 2002, genetic samples from Gary Leiderman, Jane Mixer, and John Rules were all being processed in the same laboratory. Even more surprising, on the same day, an analyst was working on the blood droplet from Jane's hand in 1969. Bloody clothes from Rulis's mother's murder were also being tested. While DNA evidence is typically reliable, this case presented confusion. Prosecutors attempted to explain the presence of the child's DNA by suggesting that Rulis may have witnessed the murder, but there was no evidence linking Leiderman to Rulis. Therefore, the primary question arose. Could the laboratory have accidentally mixed up the DNA samples? Leiderman's defense attorney raised the possibility of lab contamination, which seemed to be a more plausible explanation. They argued that the lab might have unintentionally mixed up the samples, particularly considering the presence of a child's DNA on the hand of the victim. If such a mix-up could occur, it cast doubt on the reliability of the pantyhose DNA as well. This significantly undermined the prosecution's key evidence. The prosecution did not back down easily. They presented witnesses who detailed the extensive precautions taken by the lab to prevent errors and keep evidence separate. Supervisor Jeffrey Nye testified that there were no mix-ups. Surprisingly, Leiderman opted not to defend himself in court. After a 2-week trial and just a few hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Leiderman was convicted of first-degree murder. Jane's father, Dan Mixer, broke down in tears, while her sister Barbara described feeling numb. In a memoir about the trial, Maggie Nelson expressed lingering doubts about the true identity of the killer. The verdict had a profound impact on Leiderman and his family. During his sentencing, Leiderman finally spoke in court, expressing regret for the Mixer's loss and maintaining his innocence. Despite his plea, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Leiderman continued to fight for his innocence through appeals and support from believers, but a new trial was never granted. He passed away in prison in 2019 at the age of 74. While the case is closed, doubts and questions remain, leaving Jane Mixer's murder unresolved for many. Tanya van Kielenborg, an adventurous and free-spirited young woman, was born in British Columbia, Canada, on March 7, 1969. Throughout her childhood, she displayed a rebellious side, exemplified by her bold choice of wearing a man's tuxedo to her high school prom. This early glimpse into her independent and unconventional nature foreshadowed her future endeavors. Tanya's insatiable curiosity and love for exploration led her to embark on a journey across Europe alongside her best friend, May Robson, just before she met her eventual boyfriend, Jay Cook. This experience had a profound impact on her, fueling her desire to continue traveling and avoiding commitments that might hinder her freedom. Despite her inclination towards a nomadic lifestyle, Tanya understood the importance of responsibility. To support her adventures, she worked part-time as a dog walker and a waitress at Pickwick's, a British-themed restaurant in Vancouver City. Her decision to forego college and focus on her goal of traveling demonstrated her unwavering determination to carve her own path in life. J. Roland Cook, born on December 16, 1966, hailed from Saanich, British Columbia. By the time 1987 arrived, Jay, at the age of 20, found himself grappling with a sense of aimlessness. Uncertain about his future, he faced the pressures of adulthood without a clear vision of his goals. Growing up in a family that instilled a strong work ethic, thanks to his father, Gordon J., along with his 2 sisters, contributed to the family business, Cook and Talbot Limited Heating Specialists, a small family-run company specializing in furnace installations. Although Jay contemplated a shift towards marine biology, he engaged in the family business to occupy his time. Jay's reputation as a responsible and dependable individual extended back to his high school days. At social gatherings, he showcased his caring nature by intervening when a friend faced potential harm due to excessive drinking. Jay's spontaneous and lively nature led him to leave his job at a pizza parlor to cycle through rain for 3 hours just to join friends. His life took a significant turn when he met Tanya through a mutual friend in July of the same year. Tanya was drawn to Jay's caring and responsible demeanor, and their relationship quickly blossomed. Despite uncertainties about his own future, Jay's willingness to take on challenges and his dynamic personality endeared him to those around him. Tanya and Jay's relationship, though relatively short-lived, was marked by a sense of adventure. Tanya's initial hesitance toward settling down was juxtaposed with Jay's eagerness to carve out a future together. Their decision to embark on a work-related trip to Seattle reflected not only their commitment to each other, but also their shared enthusiasm for new experiences. Unfortunately, this trip would take a dark turn that would cost both Tanya and Jay their lives. The plan involved a scenic route starting with a ferry from Victoria to Port Angeles, Washington, followed by a drive through various highways to eventually reach Seattle. Initially, Tanya tried to invite her best friend, May, to join them on the trip, but May had to decline due to illness. Reflecting later, May could not shake off the guilt, wondering if her presence might have altered the tragic events that unfolded. The young couple embarked on their journey on November 18, 1987, in Jay's father's 1977 Ford Club van. The purpose of the trip was for Jay to pick up the furnace from a supplier in Seattle. Despite a minor detour and a missed turnoff, the first leg of their journey seemed uneventful. However, the last confirmed sighting of Jay and Tanya was at a ferry terminal in Bremerton at 10:16 p.m., where they purchased a ticket to Seattle. The following morning, when the supplier waited in vain for them to collect the furnace, concerns set in. The Kylenborg and Cook's families, linked by the missing couple, reported them missing on November 20th. Despite growing concern, law enforcement hesitated to initiate a comprehensive investigation due to the lack of evidence indicating foul play. Meanwhile, Bill Van Kylenborg, a lawyer, decided to take matters into his own hands as the families anxiously awaited updates. Frustrated by the lack of progress, he organized a helicopter search, but the vastness of Washington state hindered his efforts. However, on November 24th, a devastating discovery was made when Tanya's partially unclothed body was found in a ditch near Parson Creek Road in Skagit County. She had been assaulted, bound with plastic ties, and shot execution style in the head. Bill Van Kylenborg, Tanya's father, was called upon to identify his daughter. Following the horrifying discovery of Tanya Van Kylenborg's lifeless body near Parson Creek Road, investigators uncovered several crucial pieces of evidence that further intensified the mystery and horror surrounding the case. A bartender at Essie's Tavern in Bellingham reported finding Tanya's wallet and a set of keys behind the bar. Initially considered lost property, the bartender's realization, prompted by news of Tanya's case, led him to contact the police. The contents of the wallet were confirmed to belong to Tanya, prompting a closer examination of the area. As investigators delved into the surroundings, additional clues began to emerge. They discovered zip ties similar to the ones used to bind Tanya, linking the crime scene to Essie's Tavern. This detail suggested a potential connection between where her belongings were found and her brutal murder. The investigation took a significant turn when the team located a van that matched the description provided by Bill Van Kylenborg. Jay Cook had been driving this van, and it was found near Tanya's body. Upon inspection, the interior of the van revealed a grim reality. It was covered in blood belonging to both Tanya and Jay. The condition of the van, combined with the blood evidence, immediately raised concerns about Jay's well-being. Initially suspected due to his unknown whereabouts, Jay Cook was now seen as another victim. The evidence strongly indicated that he too had met a tragic end, dispelling earlier suspicions of his involvement in Tanya's case. On November 26th, Scott Walker discovered Jay Cook's lifeless body during a hunting trip in Snohomish County, just 50 miles from where Tanya was found. If Tanya's crime scene was gruesome, Jay's discovery was even more chilling. The scene was grim, with dog collars and twine tightly wound around Jay's neck. Disturbingly, tissues and a pack of cigarettes had been shoved down his throat, causing asphyxiation. Severe head wounds and bloodstains on his clothes suggested he had been subjected to brutal violence, possibly torture. The timeline of events surrounding Jay's death became a crucial aspect of the investigation. Given that the couple's van was found closer to Tanya's body than Jay's, it was speculated that Jay might have been killed first. The disturbing implication was that the perpetrator might have eliminated Jay to facilitate the assault on Tanya without any hindrance. The gruesome details of Jay's death painted a horrifying picture, leaving investigators struggling with the magnitude of the crimes committed against the young couple. As law enforcement worked tirelessly to reconstruct the sequence of events, the haunting question of who was responsible for such brutal acts loomed large. While Jay's discovery brought some closure to his family, it heightened the urgency of solving the case. With both victims confirmed deceased, the focus shifted to identifying the perpetrator. In the aftermath of Tanya Van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook's brutal murders, their families faced a new wave of torment in December 1987. An anonymous letter writer claiming to be the killer sent threatening letters to both families. Upon further examination of the correspondence, the unidentified author was eventually ruled out as a suspect, leaving the families with more questions than answers. Detective Jim Scharf, deeply affected by the horrific nature of the unresolved case, played a crucial role in the pursuit of justice. In 1995, he played a key role in establishing a cold case team, and the case involving Tanya and Jay became one of their earliest assignments. The search for answers took a significant turn in May 2003 when investigators analyzed the victim's van. Among the crucial pieces of evidence discovered were Tanya's black pants, which contained male DNA that did not match Jay Cook. This unidentified DNA, referred to as Individual A, became a focal point for investigators. Despite uploading the profile to the Combined Database Index System, the FBI's National Offender Database in 2003, no matches were found, leaving the case at a frustrating standstill. Throughout the years, Detective Scharf encountered numerous theories and false leads, with over 200 names crossing his desk. In 2015, a woman named Chelsea Rustad, unrelated to the victims, submitted her DNA to a public database in order to explore her family history. Little did she know that her DNA would play a crucial role in unraveling the mystery surrounding Tanya and Jay's fate. The breakthrough finally occurred on April 25, 2018. Inspired by the arrest of the Golden State offender, Detective Scharf, eager to utilize the same technology, collaborated with Parabon Nanolabs and genetic genealogist C.C. Moore. Individual A's DNA was uploaded to GEDmatch, and within a few hours Moore identified second cousins, allowing her to construct a detailed family tree. The name that emerged from this investigation was William Earl Talbot II. To confirm the match, investigators discreetly followed Talbot until they were able to obtain a discarded paper coffee cup. Forensic scientist Lisa Collins subsequently confirmed the match between the DNA on Talbot's cup and Individual A. On May 17, 2018, William Earl Talbot II was apprehended after an exhaustive search spanning more than 30 years. The families of Tanya Van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook, who had endured years of uncertainty, were informed about this significant breakthrough. For Detective Scharf, it marked a momentous occasion, providing a sense of closure and justice to one of the most perplexing unsolved cases he had ever encountered. In June 2019, William Earl Talbot was found guilty and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murders of Tanya Van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook. However, on December 7, 2021, an appellate court overturned the conviction due to juror bias, opening the door to the potential for a second trial. On December 22, 2022, the appellate court dismissed the idea of a retrial. Nevertheless, the Washington State Supreme Court intervened on the same day, reinstating the guilty verdict. The court emphasized that the defense had chosen not to utilize peremptory challenges to dismiss the biased juror. As of December 22, 2022, Talbot remains in custody.
In the lively community of College Station, Texas, Virginia Ginger Freeman, a 40-year-old wife, mother, and dedicated real estate agent, was recognized for her vibrant personality and deep connections to her community. However, the peace of this close-knit town was shattered on December 1, 1981, when Virginia's life took a tragic turn. Virginia's usual routine of showing a vacant Brazos County residence to a potential buyer ended in a horrifying discovery for her husband, Charles Freeman, Alarmed when Virginia did not return home from work, Charles discovered her lifeless body in the empty property. The scene was marked by extreme violence, with evidence of head trauma and neck stabbing. It was a crime that investigators later described as an act of excessive force, highlighting the brutality inflicted on this unsuspecting woman. The investigation began with Charles Freeman as a primary focus, a standard procedure in such cases. However, a thorough investigation ruled out any marital issues, and Charles provided a solid alibi, clearing him as a suspect. Early leads surfaced when a local brick mason reported seeing a man in a vehicle near the crime scene, leading to forensic hypnosis to create a composite sketch and a partial license plate. Unfortunately, this lead did not result in any concrete information. 2 years went by with no progress until a potential link to another case emerged. Henry Lee Lucas, already convicted of a murder in Ringgold, Texas, approximately 250 miles away, surprised the court by confessing to numerous additional cold cases. Investigators, hopeful for a breakthrough, presented Lucas with a photo of Virginia, and he admitted to stabbing her in the neck. However, when Lucas could not identify the crime scene, it became clear that this was a false confession, a last-ditch effort to postpone his fate. The case remained inactive until 1997, when advancements in DNA technology offered a glimmer of hope. DNA discovered beneath Virginia's fingernails indicated a struggle, prompting the Brazos County Sheriff's Department, in partnership with the Texas Rangers Cold Case Task Force, to reopen the investigation. Suspects underwent DNA testing, including Charles Freeman, whose DNA did not align with the evidence recovered. Despite initial challenges, investigators focused on James Otto Earhart, a former appliance repairman who, 6 years after Virginia's murder, was convicted of killing a 9-year-old girl nearby. The difficulty arose in obtaining Earhart's DNA posthumously, as he was executed in 1999. Utilizing genealogy records and assistance from Earhart's son, the team received approval to exhume his body. In June 2018, the condition of Earhart's remains, left exposed in a cardboard box, posed a significant hurdle. Nevertheless, a DNA sample was successfully extracted from a femur bone and analyzed. On August 30, 2019, the results definitively matched the DNA profile from Virginia's fingernail clippings. James Otto Earhart was posthumously identified as the culprit, bringing closure to a long-standing mystery. While Charles Freeman did not witness justice being served, his children found comfort in the resolution of their mother's case. Despite their disappointment in not being able to apprehend Earhart, the investigators celebrated the resolution of a case that had plagued the community for nearly 4 decades. The journey from a brutal murder to a posthumous conviction highlighted the determination of law enforcement and the advancing role of forensic technology in solving cold cases.